Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session. So, from team structures, workflows, and even product positioning, every aspect of the old enterprise marketing is now redundant. Today, we'll hear from leaders who are on the front line of this transformation, exploring how CMOs can adapt people, processes, partners, and products to drive growth in the AI search era. So, today, the leaders on the panel are Mahesh Kumar. Mahesh is a CMO at Excel Data, a leader in data observability for enterprises with deep expertise in demand generation, product marketing, go-to-market strategy. Mahesh brings a practitioner's view of how AI search will reshape pipeline creation and marketing operating models. We have Gallant Chen. Gallant is a seasoned advisor to high-growth enterprises, specializing in digital transformation, organizational design, and scaling marketing systems. With years of experience guiding CMOs and and executives, he brings a strategic perspective on how leaders can prioritize GEO against other enterprise transformation agendas. We have Joyce Wang. Joyce leads global growth at Dropbox, overseeing strategies at the intersection of product, content, and customer acquisition. With a background in SaaS and category leading tech, she brings sharp insights into how product strategy, workflows, and differentiation will evolve in the GEO era. And last but not least, certainly, we have moderating this session, Rishabh Shakar. Rishabh is one of Pepper's co-founders, where he helps enterprises scale growth through AI-led content and creative operations. He brings a unique founder's perspective on how GEO is redefining the future of enterprise marketing playbooks. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. And over to you, Rishabh.
Thank you, Mariana. First of all, thanks, Mahesh, thanks, Galen, thanks, Joyce, for joining us. The last 6 hours have been fruitful, and I hope I don't change the questions that we have kind of agreed upon. But to set the base, right? I think AI search isn't just a standard shift, and I think that's something that we have all agreed in the last 6 hours. It's resetting how enterprises structure people, processes, even partners, and the products that they're looking out from their vendors, right? From your perspective, across the people, processes, and say partners and products, which of these dimensions requires the first reset for a CMO or the person responsible for growth within enterprises? And probably you can start with Mahesh, and then Gallant and Joyce can pitch in there.
Sure. So I think, I want to change it a little bit. I want to introduce a fifth P called priorities, right? I think that is like the number one, if you ask my opinion. It is resetting priorities for us in a very significant way. And, outside of that, the priority aspect of it, I think the people dimension is like a very important one because AI currently is affecting, a lot of different functions, how they work, how you retrain them to be comfortable with AI and leveraging it kind of the right way, the appropriate way. There is a lazy way to use AI, which is it gives you all your answers, and then there is a smarter and better way to use AI. So I really would start initially with the people dimension because that is, still, I would say, one of the biggest determiners of success in the marketing organization today.
Then what are you seeing in the companies that you're advising with?
I used to be a former consultant, so I've always been big on process. I find process and processes have always been important, and I often find they're underdeveloped and underinvested in. So most companies, in my mind at least, don't have clear definitions, for example, for metrics and the logic for how those metrics are calculated, right? And so having these metrics clearly defined, from my perspective, will be critical for AI agents to properly help support and scale marketing efforts going forward, right? If there's not alignment on what key metrics are, or more likely how they're actually defined or measured, then AI may simply optimize on the wrong things. So I go back to like having the right processes, the documentation to be able to feed to the AI think that's going to be critical going forward.
Lovely. And Joyce, what about you?
Yeah, just to add on to both of what they said, and particularly Mahesh, of how he talked about people, that's been very top of mind of how I think about redesigning my org, as well as the individual talent that I'm bringing in. And every time, either existing or new recs, I first ask myself is, how is AI changing this specific, job role? Not just the use cases, but the technical talent that we need to bring in. So what I'm observing is it's a little bit of interest of where I'm seeing marketers become more technical in some ways beyond just experimentation on AI tools. And on the converse, as the product org, I'm seeing them become more closer to the customer because they have to better understand how it's being used as a blend. So it's this interesting kind of moment of where, on a whole, AI is adding a lot of complexity, but the marketing challenge is becoming ever more difficult because you have to distill very complex models and messaging into a very easy to consume takeaway for your customers.
Lovely. And Mahesh, to your point of people, right? How should CMOs re-architect their teams, right, for the AI search, right? How are you looking at? Does this team sit within the SEO infrastructure, or is it a separate set of people, separate set of team, separate team altogether that you think is needed to attack this new channel altogether?
It was a very good question. I think it's fair to recognize that we are in the early stages right now. So, obviously, any re-architecting and re-changing of your organization, you have to proceed with some caution, right? Because things are changing all the time. But given that geo still is very much content oriented, it kind of its natural center of gravity kind of rests in that content marketing, that type of group or that organization, right? Because they are ultimately responsible for that aspect of it. So I would definitely kind of start there as today, like put the center of gravity over there. But before making any organizational change, at least what we've done here at Accelerate is we've built like a GEO center of excellence, right? Which is like a cross-functional team that's focused very specifically on geo-related problems, right? Like how do we get better? How do we measure ourselves? What do we need to do next? What are we learning from things that are going on in the market? And they're kind of pulling in from there. We're pulling in from product marketing, brand, social community, of course, the content teams and so on. Investing that team with very clear goals, budget, and authority to make decisions. So that's sort of the interim step. As for the organization in the future, I really think we have to wait a little bit, but also when you make that decision, step back a little bit and think in terms of how is AI affecting the entire marketing organization, not like where does GEO sit. Because I really do believe, like about 2 years ago, I wrote a blog or post on the 10x dawn of the 10x B2B marketer, right? So I really do believe, the dawn of the 10x B2B market. It's well and truly here in the dawn. Maybe we're like a little bit further in. Then, like, what does that organization look like, right? Like, is a PMM now like sort of like a GM of a particular line of business, or things of that nature, right? Like, how do you reassess the entire job structure, job definitions, their responsibilities, metrics that they are used to measured on, and then we decide like where does that GEO aspect fit in? Because by the time we understand more, I think the tools and technology and the capabilities in this space would have evolved so much that you will find more convergence of these capabilities into fewer number of people. So maybe the way you look at the marketing organization in the future is going to be completely different than the functional roles that we are looking at right now.
Lovely. And Joyce, just if you can add on to that, right? How are you looking at talent models and talent structures within the Dropbox ecosystem, right? How does Dropbox has always been, a company that has integrated product and marketing really well. How does that AI infrastructure is being integrated into the entire ecosystem that's already existing there?
Yeah, I think Mahesh also hit on a few of the points. Is I think the pieces, there's no silver bullet. And I think where you have to be very astute is go in with a very pointed view of what are you trying to solve for? Because I think the easy trap is there's a lot of hype around it, and you can kind of chase a lot of 10 different things, but not actually drive impact. So how I've been infusing it within the org on an individual and a kind of org-wide level, I think about it on individual as the skill base. Do they have the growth mindset? Are they showing demonstration of experimentation and a command of like the impact, not just it's interesting? Org-wide level, outside of how we're changing workflows and tools, there is where we are in the maturity curve, I think, is maybe if you talk to a few folks 18 months to 2 years ago, it was overwhelming. Now the basic common challenge is AI adoption at scale that I hear a lot of times with my peers. And as I think about that, one thing that's been top of mind for me of what I'm trying to solve for of roles that can help the marketing org across the board is how I can elevate the AI fluency across the entire organization. So you're not just kind of individually looking at one single talent, but the overall company as well as your team of how does everybody have a base knowledge of AI, and then you can elevate together.
Got it. I think that brilliantly adds on to the point that probably technical skills, right, or specific skills may not be as big a differentiator as AI becomes smarter, and uh, AI proficiency itself will make that distance covered very easily, right? But Garen, from your point of processes being important, if you can highlight across your advisory work with different companies, industries, right? What structural blind spots did you see or do you see in enterprise org charts or enterprise orgs, right, when it comes to GE or AI readiness in general?
Sure. There's like two blind spots that I see. One is, at least historically, a lot of SEO teams and paid search teams in companies, they don't collaborate. They don't meet regularly. They don't share knowledge or learnings. And to me, that's a miss, right? So much of what they do intersects, and collaboration is key. With GEO, it's only going to get more complicated, right? It's more important for them to work together because the landscape is changing so quickly, and changes in AI results will impact them both. So they need to work together and share learnings and collaborate because the whole ecosystem affects them both equally. And within a company, you're going to want to make sure that you're on top of that. The other blind spot that I see is that, at least historically, maybe it's my clients, but a lot of the SEO teams rely on tools like Search Console, SEMrush, Ahrefs. That's how they measure performance. In a world of GEO, and I've heard some rumblings that like Google isn't going to build Search Console for AEO, right, or GEO, right? And so how are you going to actually measure performance for GEO relative to SEO? I think it's much more fundamentally challenging, right? So if you're successful in AEO and you are cited and the user wants to buy your product, at least for a lot of my software clients, like what are they going to do? They're most likely not going to click on the citation, right? Most of them are going to open up another browser window. They're going to search on your brand. Maybe they click on your paid search ad. Maybe they click on an organic listing, or maybe they just go and direct type your website URL, right? And so the challenge is like, how can you attribute and figure out that that was from AEO? And so I think one of the things that's going to be, potential blind spot is like, how do you solve for that? And I think the answer is really bringing in analytics and potentially data science resources to properly measure the impact of AEO, right? I think that's just going to be super critical.
I think that's very well put. I think what the shift I've seen in the last 7-8 years of running the company, right? In the initial couple of years, all marketing activity was seen as a checklist, right? Okay, these are the things that I need to do, and that's where marketeers and CMOs are also kind of focused on, right? But the last 5 years, the crop of people, the crowd of people who are heading marketing is completely different because the ask is also different now. I'm sure Mahesh here or Joyce and people that you deal with, Garen, are responsible for the end outcome, and how it's done is something that they are really answerable to, right? And I think for that to be able to be done, I think all systems needs to probably talk to each other in a better way. It's not a paid channel or it's not an SEO channel. Marketing now is a revenue contribution channel, and overall, how does that add up is something that needs to be looked at more holistically, given the geo play in there, right? And I think just leading on to that, I think Mahesh, last 5 years,
Sorry,
maybe
Rishabh, can I interrupt you? Like one thing, definitely totally
sorry.
agree with what you're saying, and I think it goes back to one of the things that I think Joyce had mentioned, which is you have to rethink your team, and does your team need to be potentially more technical or more analytical than they have in the past, right? Because a lot of these things are not going to be as easily solved for, and so having teams that are more flexible, that can take on sort of more technical skills to actually do analysis, or understand the sort of like intersections across all of these different things, I think is going to be increasingly more important.
And I was just going to actually add to your point about breaking silos as we're getting into the conversation is even beyond organic and paid search, I would extend it to the brand team, particularly of how GEO is evolving in the weights of the models beyond just mentions, it's citations and sentiment. And a lot of that has a more kind of before there's this brand versus demand or performance, and it needs to be an and they need to work further together. So that's where I also see it as an expansive part of how the team needs to work together.
No, I think just perfectly put, right? I think I was talking to a senior marketing leader, right? And we realized that how, because of geo, right? Brand and your sentiment, for example, of the brand online will play as much a role as, say, content that your, say, demand team has put out there, because that's the intelligence of the AI layer that comes in. And if the brand is not doing well, and if there's, say, brand like poor recommendations online, it will act negatively for geo, right? So nobody's winning that race, and I think that's very, very well put, right? Mahesh, I think have being a marketer in a B2B company, I'm sure you're responsible for an X contribution to pipeline or overall demand generation, right? How are you looking at that being impacted? And I'll just quickly explain what I would love for you to cover is, there's a traditional knowledge that B2B, there's a 7 touch point sale that happens. It's been talked to us everywhere that every B2B sale happen after 7 touch points, right? Now suddenly all those touch points are happening in a single layer of a chat GPT, right? All my research, all my comparisons, all my reviews and recommendations can happen on a single ecosystem, right? So how is somebody like you preparing for that new reality of B2B marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very good points. I think you actually took my words right off my mouth, because I think if you look at GEO, I feel that is going to shorten the buyer's journey. Because to your point, it collapses research, comparison, recommendation, that entire cycle. And in a typical B2B cycle, you tend to be like in these phases, right? I'm capturing information and I'm trying to compare. But with information in an LLM being so accessible, right? And easily prepackaged with very little overhead, search overhead, if you will, the natural tendency of a buyer, I feel, even if they're in the research phase, is to go that next step, right? Which is like to your point, in one session they'll go from buying to comparing or thinking, researching, comparing, and then recommendation, right, in one go. So in that situation, like, what does that mean to your content, right? If they come in and take a look at the content, they've gotten some information with the through the LLMs, and to Galen's point, click on a link or do a search, come to your website. Like, how do you walk them through what is your content, right? You always try to guess. That person comes in, first time visitor, they don't know much about us, so you're like in a certain phase, right? But then what if they've done research already on the website, I'm sorry, on the LLM? They come to the website, you can't treat them again like they are like kind of novices, right? They don't know much about you, so you can't start at that point. So the way you package content, the way you write content on your websites has to change. And I also think, to Joyce's point earlier, brand becomes super critical, right? Like what they perceive you as, how you show up in that, LLM session, ChatGPT or whatever, has to match with what they are seeing on your website. The languaging and or the positioning. There has to be very strong synergies there, because they know a lot more. They're giving you less, I feel, right? Less leeway. They have less time with you, right? In that sense, because I've already consumed prepackaged information. What would have taken me 2 hours of research in like 30-second time frame. Now I'm coming to your website. So there is less, I feel there is less leeway. So you have to get right to the point and try to do your best to kind of serve that interest over there. I think those are some things that are changing in terms of how the early signals on the pipeline and how you need to treat them. You definitely have to have metrics. We already are looking at pipeline generated through LLM first touch, through LLM. They come in from an LLM onto your website. We're also measuring influence in a deal cycle, as to as these LLM inquiries come in from through redirect through LLM. We kind of look at, like, within a deal cycle, how many touch points we get from there, and we are seeing a very significant uptick. I would say about incoming traffic is about 20-25% is coming in through those sources currently for us, and it's continuing to increase. That has increased about 250-300% just in last half of year to the last 6 months. So if you look back a year and separate it into two halves, the second half of that year going back, at 12 months, is about 250 300% increase in traffic that's coming in through those sources. So it's becoming very important for pipeline generation for us.
I would actually add
Lovely.
to the
And I
piece
think
of where Mahesh, you were saying is like being educated of how the metrics are evolving, because I think sometimes, gone are the days are you just looking at traffic. And exactly what Mahesh is saying is the entire discovery consideration process is just not on your surfaces. It does not take away from the fact that you still need to work on those product pages, making sure you have the content on the third-party review sites, because that's what the LLM
Yeah.
models crawl. But what are your traditional metrics, as you might see lower in non-branded words and it's showing up higher in branded search terms, because they're going through the whole discovery in whatever ChatGPT and they've landed on a brand of shortlisted vendors, and that's how it shows up on your side. So that's where you just have to be familiar of it's the evolution of the KPIs are different. And for the referral traffic, they're much higher intent because they're way further along in that journey.
Mhm.
No, I think, to that point of third-party reviews, I think we were having a webinar and somebody, gave us a very interesting anecdote as to in the cybersecurity space, they were kind of ranking like they were the top player. But when you asked an LLM why, who are the top five players, they ranked on second. And when they did an analysis on why that was happening, they realized that although that particular company was top on G2, for example, LLM was fetching a few sources from Trustpilot, and that's where the number one ranking, company had a few positive reviews. And that company then probably invested a few months, like a few reviews there, and were back on top, right? So I think a lot of that is so much of re-engineering is happening with that. But I think as a space, especially in B2B, it will be very important to track all of these very granular movements happening across ranking as well, apart from coming up in the first place itself. um, but Joyce, I think just adding on to that, right? And I'll probably take the leeway of changing the question a bit to what we had earlier discussed. Too, Dropbox till now has been a company that's vertical, right? And we have gone against the giants of the world. People that have these workspaces that are horizontal and still taking a huge chunk of the pie in terms of that, right? Do you think in the LLM world, right, where probably the service, the vertical service that we're offering may not be a search term in itself, that will play to a disadvantage? Or do you think it will be an advantage to be very focused on one specific thing, because probably your retrievability or your trustworthiness on that specific thing will go higher? How are you looking at, because the the where I'm coming from is maybe search around workspaces overall may go higher, right? And that's where your competitors may have an edge because they have a more number of suits, right? And nobody probably is searching for storage specifically, right? So I think how is say overall strategy for you Dropbox looking at when it's vertical versus horizontal in the LLM world?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's very timely of where we are in the strategy. I would say it's actually both in some ways. Where it's played an advantage for us is where our core business has always been known, where we have a lot of authority and trust. And I think you'll see it in the AI summaries and overviews and where the authority ranks favorably for the LM. Where it doesn't do so well for us, and this is the challenge we're facing, is when we're trying to enter new adjacencies with our expanded product portfolio where it's less known. So I think about that kind of, somebody had framed to me of the GEO as both long and short-term memory. And that's where we're trying to work harder on is the short-term memory that is reflective of our new products that we're launching, such as Dash, which is the AI content search. And how does it, but so much of our existing content is really on cloud storage as it's really been known for us. So that's where we face both of those benefits and friction points.
Got it. And Dan, to your point, I think but you while in your interactions with all the enterprises that you've had, right? How do you ensure which companies to probably prioritize GEO and AI search and which companies shouldn't, right? For example, do you have a framework for industries that have the most, headwind versus industries that can probably deprioritize or let it be for a while before everything is figured out, right? Because obviously there's so many things to do. It's not possible for, each channel to be optimized, right? So can you also go to a company and say that it's okay? There's a lot of noise in AI search. You don't need to jump on that bandwagon. We'll get to it probably in a year's now, right? So I want to understand that framework or the discussions that are happening around that in your closed rooms.
I definitely look at the AEO world, and I feel a lot. Uh, I guess I'm lucky in that most of my clients are software businesses, where at the end of the day, you still need to come to their website to actually buy, right? So content businesses, I think I feel I certainly feel their pain, which is this new world is much more potentially concerning for their businesses. I think for sort of software businesses, the challenge is it will just be harder to measure, right? If you think about a CMO and a head of marketing, like it's a hard job. One of the key things they have to do is allocate finite resources. And ultimately, there's a lot of attention, there's a lot of focus, in part because a lot of marketing leaders and CMOs have actually pretty big budgets, right? And so oftentimes it's in some cases, you have the largest line item in the business, right? Maybe other than like AWS expenses and things like that. But so, it's always been important to determine as a CMO and marketing leader, how do you allocate those finite resources to the highest ROI areas? I do think, like we've talked about a little bit already, like measuring GEO's impact is going to be hard. But I think as a marketing leader, you need to have a point of view, right? On if I invest in GEO, what will that drive for me downstream, right? And so for my business, for my clients that are mostly SaaS businesses, it's what is this going to drive for me in terms of leads, MQLs, opportunity, pipeline, and ultimately closed won? Because if I can't at least quantify that at least a high level, it's really hard for me to figure out if I should be investing in this relative to other places. And I think it's easy to, I think Joyce mentioned this earlier, it's easy to get caught up in the hype that surrounds AEO. Like, we have to do this, everybody's doing this. But at the end of the day, marketing leaders have always had to decide if SEO is worth investing in versus paid media, right? Versus event marketing, versus partner marketing. And AEO will be no different. Marketers will need to figure out what do they think they can get from AEO, and therefore how they want to prioritize it relative to the other investments that they want to make.
So may I add a little bit of point out there? I think a lot of it depends on the space you are in and your target customer, right? In my case, we deal with data leaders and people in the data space, Okay. So I'm assuming 80-90% of them plus are ChatGPT users already. So given that, right, I'm not even thinking should I or not invest. It's like I have to invest. I have no other choice. You see, so my framework for getting to that decision was very different, and the reasons why. In the consumer business, then of course it's a very different sort of a spread of type of customers. Some may be aware of AI, ChatGPT, some may not. Some may still have a search habit. So I think a lot depends on the type of product, your persona that you're selling to, and the likelihood of them being on this platform. I'd say if you have a reasonable guess that a good number is going to be there, then it's like a dominant strategy really at that point is to invest in it.
I think
Yeah, I think, yeah, Joyce, please.
I was just going to say, to piggyback off of the investment and the spend allocation, the conversations we're having with the CFO and his finance team is ever evolving, because you're going from an area where it's, many of us might have come from the world where it's click-based attribution. It's almost more directly attributed. And this, as we talked about, it's not as causal, let's say. The other component of it is, as Dropbox has faced, is there's different routes to market and deal cycles, where you have consumer that is much faster and B2B that has much longer deal cycles. And how do you make sure you instill enough confidence in the investments you're doing for leading signals? Because you can't wait 12 months, let's say that's your lead time, and say, let me get back to you of the ROI impact. So this is where it's the evolution of how do you articulate and educate your counterparts so that there's confidence in your investments.
Lovely.
Yeah,
I think,
building on Joyce's point around the touch and click-based stuff, I think one of the things that I think, will be part of the conversation is, does it make sense to have more media mix modeling to understand AEO relative to MTA, right? So a lot of, businesses still focus on multi-touch attribution, especially ones that are mostly digital. Whereas, folks that spend a lot in offline and things like that, they invest in media mix modeling, but AEO is going to be one of those things that's going to complicate the world. And I do think having a media mix approach, or at least some part of it, is going to be part of the answer in terms of better understanding AEO.
Mm-hmm.
great. I think, as a side note to everyone at Pepper listening under question, I think we should develop a thesis of which companies, which TGs, are worth investing, all guns blazing, and which we can probably look from the sidelines and go from there. But, I think thanks for that. I think moving on, one thing that probably is pertinent to us as a company, Pepper, right? And I think that the whole agency ecosystem is building versus the whole agency ecosystem that is needed to probably build the GEO ecosystem, right? I think the last 20 years, companies and institutions have been built on paid media, on SEO services, right? The Dentsus of the world, the Publicis now as an example, right? Would love to understand how you folks are looking at both from a brand side, Mahesh and Joyce, and both from and from the external perspective, Gallant, when you interact with CMOs, how are you looking at the P&L when it comes to outsourcing versus hiring someone in house and developing these capabilities within the team? Anybody can go.
Joyce, you want to take that first?
Yeah, I can go first. In terms of, there's two folds of what I am doing currently and then what I anticipate in the not so distant future. I think in the imminent term, when I look at agencies and how we've been evaluating them, it's been, for lack of a better word, is sometimes point solution. And what I'm trying to look for is more expansive. How much can they own beyond the end-to-end workflow? So even if not even talking about media buy, even talking about the content workflow, I think about a lot of AI tools that we've brought in-house. It was just starting with content creation and velocity. And now where I'm trying to probe is where are the opportunities opportunities to expand that to get to content publication and distribution, so I can get more lift versus 3 different solutions for each different touch points in the workflow. So I think about it similarly with media buy in terms of particularly campaign orchestration. And I think this is where I'm starting to see a lot of momentum in AI innovations, is the agentic workflows on campaign orchestration. And where, to I think earlier point Mahesh had talked about the talent, is this will then unlock my team to focus on the insights where it's serving them up versus, hands-on key needing to personalize and seeing the insights and then clicking on to what to buy and what not to buy. So I think those are 2 areas where I'm seeing agencies evolve, at least in terms of how much of the workflow are they able to own end to end. And the next wave I'm starting to see is what agentic workflows can take over to empower our teams to do more.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So let me add to that. I think just looking at getting better at geo, I think currently a hybrid model is best. Obviously, this is important. It's at least for us, is very strategic aspect of our business, is to kind of get better here and do well in this space. So you need an in-house resource to build that strategy, execute certain aspects of the strategy, and then rally your brand team and product marketing teams and other teams, internally to execute on that initiative. So strategic control, coordination, and ultimately responsibility for the results, all of that should be vested in this internal team or person. But the space is clearly moving very fast, right? I mean, it is beyond the capacity for one organization to learn because there is a lot happening. And so this is where I think the agency, people who are partners kind of come in. It's no secret we are working very well with Pepper. Excel Data, we partner with Pepper in this space, helping us out, sort of thinking through the whole geo, how do we get better? So, and we're learning a lot from them. Sharing what we are seeing, in terms of observations. So it's been a very fruitful sort of a partnership working with them. So a hybrid model for now definitely works really well. As things progress, then it's kind of everything is up in the air. You go either way, everything inside or most of it outside. I think that remains to be seen. But for now, definitely, I would highly recommend partnering with some people who have seen a lot of other evidence the strategies that work for a company X versus the other. Like you don't know it until you try it, and it could be like 6 months before you get around to it. So to have that constant feedback loop from the market is such a valuable insight and input. So that's why I feel like at least for now and at least in the near future, you definitely need a partner working with you in addition to your own core team.
I'll build on that, and I definitely agree with the hybrid approach. When people, this has happened, like in-house versus agency, this sort of like question, it happens in every area, not just GEO. I think I look at it, and at the end of the day, you want to be able to hire the best people, period, full stop. Now, you have to be honest with yourself, which is like, can my company recruit the best people in this space or with this skill set? And it may be that you can't. I do think because this space is so quickly emerging and so nascent, a lot of the best talent is likely to be with external partners in the short term. And so I think partnering with those folks is going to be critical to accelerating GEO efforts. But I am a big fan of what Mahesh advocates for, which is a hybrid approach, because at the end of the day, right, you have to have some sort of internal expertise in-house. Otherwise, it's challenging to call BS on external partners. It's challenging to make sure they're aligned with your goals. And so I think like in the short term, making sure that you're working with the external partners that have the expertise, but being cognizant that longer term, you want to have some of this expertise in-house so that you can build on it going forward.
Right. And I think one last question before we probably take one question from the crowd as well. And this is something that is very close to my heart as well, is with the last 5-10 years, right, the data platforms, the programmatic platforms, right? All of us have just been fed so much data that every decision making, especially in marketing, is asked on some rationale behind why is it happening, what's the ROI, what's the ROAS, how are we looking at it, everything being measured in the outcome and the contribution to probably the bottom line, right? So if you start doing that, right, the problem is that leaves very less space for experimentation. And when a new channel like an AEO or a GEO comes up, right, that kinds of makes us take action that is very short term oriented, and probably not help us look at the long term. And there may not be a long term. I'm not saying that there's a long term definitely there, but how do you in your current roles advocate for certain budgets to be okay about being experimentation and not having a result tied to that, or a certain team working on something that may not have immediate impact within brands, or if you consult with brands, that is that the mental model that you folks use internally, or I would love to just to understand that.
This is actually very
Right.
timely. Something we've been working with finance on the past 6 to 12 months, where we actually have ring fence budget in terms of our business, like BAU, business as usual budget, as well as our experimentation budget. And even though we have an experimentation budget, it's not to say that it's like, hey, free reign of how we use it. We have very specific guardrails of how it graduates from kind of two phases of pure incubation to, are we seeing a line of sight of where it's close to the guardrails of the bulk of our run rate budget, and then it further graduates. So we have it protected to be able to give that flexibility of innovation and making sure that it has that bandwidth for experimentation. To your other part about short term, I think that's a really important point in the wave of GEO, where to our earlier point about citations and authority, like trust is, that's not just about visibility, it's about trust and in that baked in, and that is not a short-term goal that you can achieve. So you almost have to adapt to how it's being weighted and not be so myopic that it's just, hey, how am I going to meet my in-quarter goals?
Lovely.
Agree. I think experimentation budget absolutely essential, and it depends on where you are in the journey, right? Like if you are defining and building a new category, obviously the percentage of experimentation budget is going to be much higher than if you're in a well-established category and you're a market leader who's like it's like Joyce at Dropbox. That the numbers are going to be, the experiment numbers are going to be much more scrutinized. Less room for error there, right? So certainly we do have that, like a larger percentage, and then of course there is the CMO slush fund that you can always kind of dip into once in a while to run something that you see very tactically. So I'd say if you're a growing company, growing startup like us, we are in a growth phase right now. Certainly you need to have a good portion of it sort of as an experimentation budget, because that's how you're going to find the next big growth driver and the next big growth driver, and you never know which one it is going to be. But if you're a more mature organization, obviously the percentages vary, but obviously it's a great idea to have some to opportunistically kind of try some new things.
I'm like, from my perspective, I think I kind of look at the experimentation part of this as a huge opportunity for a lot of businesses, and in particular, more challenger businesses, right? So, like, if you think about SEO, unfortunately, it's the odds have been stacked against them for a long time, right? Which is, so much of SEO is driven by domain authority. And if you didn't have any domain authority, it was really hard for you to rank number one on highly competitive keywords. And this is a brave new world where challengers can rise up relatively quickly. We've seen some of this stuff. Now, this may change over time, but like, if you can get citations quickly with volume, we have already seen that drives the actual LLMs, and it drives traffic that actually produces value for a number of sort of like not even startups, but just companies that are investing in this in a heavy way. And that would not have been possible in a lot of more traditional SEO spaces. And so I do think that this is something where, especially challenger businesses, should think about this much more proactively than potentially incumbents that may be more focused on protecting their share. And I think that there is potentially a world of this is a short-term land grab, but a short-term land grab can be the difference between positioning yourself, to be a much larger player down the road, and not making it at all. So I do think it's a big opportunity for companies that are aggressive and thoughtful and figure out how to make some of this stuff work.
Great, thank you. Chris asks in the comments that can you give some specific examples of metrics that are becoming more important in AE or GEO, or conversely metrics that are falling by the wayside? I'll probably chime in here quickly before if anyone of you. I think what at very early days, but what we are seeing is like you curate a keyword list when it comes to SEO or even paid performance. You kind of curate a prompt list, and that's what the tool Atlas, we did a demo in the first session where we are curating a set of say 100, 200, 500 prompts, right? And tracking brand mention across all different LLMs, Perplexity, OpenAI, Gemini, all of that, and see at what like the number of times our brand is coming up, and kind of benchmark that against our competitors, right? So technically brand share, like percentage of prompts where your brand comes up, is a thing that we are tracking. And also citations, right, Garen, as you rightly said, that not many LLMs are wanting to send consumers out of the LLM ecosystem itself, right? But there's still very small embedded links that we are trying to track, and I think ultimately that is what they will monetize also. And they will be, if the more links that we'll have, the more traffic conversion we'll have from LLMs directly, right? So I think that's something that we are tracking. One smaller thing that we want to track, we still are not very sure about it, is the average position on which a brand comes up. So for example, in B2B, if an AI is recommending a software or any company, being on first versus a third will have delta impact as this channel grows, right? So I think that is something also we are growing. And one metric that we are seeing fall by the wayside is CTRs and clicks overall. I think some people are still very concerned about that. Okay, my impressions are good, but my CTR is falling because my clicks are not rising and all that stuff. I think that needs a reset altogether. I think till the time we continue to chase those, numbers, the age-old SEO metrics, I think that will not do justice to whoever is doing whatever, right? So I think that's what we are seeing from across the industries, across geographies that we are working. Anything else, Joyce, my issue, or Darren, you want to add?
I'll add one observation to it. I think the ranking matters, but I don't believe the curve is going to be as steep as you see in search, right? For the simple reason, if you look at Google and you search for something, the first entire fold is all ads and AI, summaries and things of that nature, then more ads and more ads, and eventually the first position kind of shows up. Whereas in a chat window and LLM, basically, you ask that question, you get the answer right there in a very small real estate. So you see more. So I really do believe that curve is not as steep. We don't know exactly what the slope is. So don't get disheartened that if you're not number one. I think there is a lot of things that matter in, to your point, the variety of questions you ask and how you show up there. Different, the different questions are a little bit different, and you're just researching or looking at things versus, kind of going deep a little bit versus comparison. So, having your set of questions and how you show up in these variety of questions, I think all of those are very important. And not just like, who are the top two vendors in this, and, you and somebody else shows up and that's the end of that. I don't think that is as strong as it is in the search space. But that's a theory, it remains to be proven.
I would say, from my
I think it is
perspective,
yeah.
it's going to be important. I think folks should invest in tools to track and measure GEO performance and track things like your brand share of voice in LLMs, your citations, all those different types of things. I think these are new AEO metrics, GEO metrics that are going to be important. But one thing that I would say is make sure you still track SEO. Make sure you still invest in SEO. They're connected. What works for one is going to help the other. And SEO is not going away. So don't forget about those metrics that you used to track because you think you only need to track GEO. I think you need to track it holistically and understand that it's part of this broader box. I don't know if you call it box or grouping or whatnot. So I think that would be one point. And then the other thing that I've talked about a little bit already, which is, because so much of this is going to end up resulting in brand traffic and direct traffic, you need to measure those two, right? Now the challenge will be understanding how much of that is AEO or GEO impacted. But if I am very cognizant of if brand search for a business is growing, your business is growing. And if that ever stops or starts to plateau or decline, your business is in big trouble. So that to me is like the ultimate indicator. And if you can have that grow and go up in time, that will mean that your business and your revenue is going to go up over time as well.
Lovely. Any last words, Joyce, from your end on this?
No, just I think you guys have captured all of it, which is measurement is very critical to this in terms of what you need to make sure you get in place and evolve. Think about, as Ian alluded to, share of voice, citations, AI referral traffic. It's not in the same form as it used to be. And this is without the measurement and knowing what you're looking for. We talked a lot about content. You're kind of flying blind of what content to improve, optimize, and refresh. So nothing more to add other than just +1 to everything.
Lovely. Cool. I think, thank you, folks. Thank you. This was really, really awesome. I think one of those conversations I learned a lot from. Really interesting to see how startups, how, big companies, Dropbox, and how a lot of entire industries are, shaping up their geo strategies and the new AI era that we are all moving in. I think it's very interesting to be a marketer right now. Mahesh, Joy should be. I think with all the smirks going around and with different comments, I think I can totally understand, and it's a great time to be in the industry. Thank you everyone who joined in. I think thank you for staying through the entire conversation, and we hope to share a lot of this soon with you. Thank you again, and see you in the next panel. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shab.
Bye-bye. Mhm.